Can she stand up?
Yeah, I don't.
You'll instruct us which way.
One over here. Which one goes here?
That one.
So he'll help her. His daughter will help him.
This one goes over here.
Okay, good. This one? This one goes on the side? Yeah, hello? Help him on that.
Sure.
Let's do it.
Right over there. I'll put it with the P out. I want the P out. I want the P out. Right here.
All right. Well, she really.
Let her daughter do it for her. You know what,
Email.
just do it for her.
Email. Okay. Email. Look, I'm gonna put the brick.
Come. Good. Hi, Ian.
Some stuff, something anyway. I did idea.
I can't stand it.
Here. Okay. I locked the chair.
Получайте, еще один расчет. Вот, отлично. Что я? Ничего, мы пройдем туда, и потом все зайдут. Пойдем вот так.
Right after we finish, we'll go back inside.
Yes.
Alex? We're going back in.
Step up. Take video. Put down.
Yeah.
Take both hands and put it on. I'll hold you. You just put it on.
You put more cement? Okay. Want to move it that way? It's good. It's good. Are you okay.
Set it down and go back inside.
Let everyone. From this way. I'm sorry. He's next. Come on, Beverly. We're going to go
Go inside.
First.
I'll help you. Wait, this one.
Okay.
Which one? Where is
Push it over this way.
this one? Take this one. Be careful, back down. Back up.
Oh, yeah. Let me hold it. I'm gonna have to secure. Okay.
Ya lo tienes.
Okay, it goes on the center. It's over this way.
Yeah, right.
On the center. Yeah. Okay.
Вот вы видите?
The destruction of Europe and Europe, including the great Tzaddikim, the Holy Rabbi, 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million innocent children, Hashem come to one at the hands of the Muslim, the Nazis, the Muslim, all the Tisha B'Av 1944 was the year that 20,000 inmates of the concentration camp Warsaw, unlike the majority of the Jews, partook in the implemented march, the so-called Warsaw Ghetto. We were forced to march under the blistering July 43, without food and water. Those marchers who were unable to keep right were clubbed or even shot to death by their husbands who were on company crossed with drawn bayonets. Only a third of the original 20,000 who started out ever made it to the footnote on the way to the concentration camp. Much of what is the result of the non-lefty district of Warsaw, where the Baal Shem Tov community for many years. Among the inmates of Warsaw Lager was also the unforgettable Rosenberger habit. For many years, where among them inmates of Warsaw Lager lost his life by 11 children, all finished and the gas levels of acid of family from the one. Miraculously, rabbit just a pair of children. Those who were so inclined lined up at the front of the rabbit after dark Budana Sharia Sharia Arash at the bunch and he made the bracha and quickly disappeared. It was a matter of life and death. I'm sure that the Rebbe was responsible of the and protected. He frequently urged us that after the war we should never ever forget the survivors who are in need. He himself was instrumental in to build the Aliyah complex customer living quarters in Israel. So it is incumbent on us to remember not only Tisha B'Av, but all year long. You are those, the last generation, to personally know a survivor, to bear witness to the humanity that man perpetrated against this whole man. Please, the walls of atrocity and destruction something to us. We must speak out and tell the stories on behalf of those who never had a chance to use their own voice. Always remember, never forget, never ever push over the Hanukkah. I brought to you at the eldest Solomon the 12th. And they do not fall through. I'll be on God, say that you'll find it. Amen.
Liquidation or murder started 80 years ago today, Tisha B'Av. July 22nd, it was in English, 1942. There were 460,000 Yidden in the ghetto. It was the same day as the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And it's ironic because it was the Churban of Polish Jewry. You know, there was a writer before the war. I'll translate. He said it in Yiddish. He said, when Eliyahu Hanavi arrives to announce the Geula, where do you think he's going to blow the shofar? Here at the corner of Nalufka and Geisigas. Why? Because here, centered around here, is more Yiddishkeit than anywhere in the world. The greatest center of the Jews in the world is here in Poland. The greatest center of Polish Jews is here in Warsaw. Here in Warsaw, the center of the center is Nalufka Gas. It had over 100 Bate Midrashim on it. So he said, when that day comes, Eliyahu Hanavi will sound the shofar for Mashiach on this spot, and the crowds will come. Jews, modern, traditional, Chassidic, old, young, men and women. This is what Warsaw was before the war, 1939. 1942, they started the liquidation on Tisha B'Av. It was almost all 460,000 died of either starvation, bullets, or ultimately gas over a number of months. It stopped for a few months, and the last few months, on Pesach, the uprising started with Rabbi Medzhybizh Haskama. There were very few of the Rabbanim were left. The Alexander Rebbe was killed. The Stoliner Rebbe was killed. The Radomsker Rebbe was killed. All the Rosh Yeshivas of Yachal were killed. The Kalisher Rebbe was killed. The Bandina Rebbe was killed. There were 2 or 3 Rabbanim left by when Pesach came around. And they say over the last Seder was the night that the uprising began. They went out with matzahs in their hand. And you know, they needed encouragement. So the warriors had encouragement, but there were a lot of Fruma who were involved too. And they say the last of the Rebbes was that the assessed Rebbe was the last Rebbe to survive in the ghetto. And they were saying, is he going to come to the Seder or not? Is he going to come to Ma'ariv? They were going to daven Ma'ariv and do the Seder. They didn't know. So they said, you know what? We heard he's not coming because his wife, Chaya Miriam, the Koznitzer Maggid's granddaughter, she was killed. I said, no, we heard he continued darshaning Deish Kodesh afterwards too. So they said, no, but his daughter-in-law, Cyril, was then killed. His only daughter-in-law. No, but afterwards we heard him say a few, no, but he is coming. No, he's not coming. His only son, Eliezer, right, named after the Munkat, Rabbi Eliezer he was killed, and he sat and he cried, they said, for a few days. We don't think he has the kayach anymore. No, he did. He got back up and he said a few more shiurim of the Eish Kodesh. And then they said, but his maskir with all his Torah was shot in front of him, and he is he going to come? And everybody was waiting. He was like, you know, he transcended death. He transcended pain. So they said the door opened up. And he came in his whole regalia, and he stood in front of the Olam, and they were wondering at him. And it was Ma'ariv time, and he was a beautiful Baal Tefillah. He opened up his mouth, and he said, the Nusach, he said, Baruch Es Hashem HaMevorach. And that's why the Warsaw Ghetto uprising started. That's how they did. Just a little bit of history. So, I knew this story. You know, we built this Shul, we put in the stones of 22 Batei Knessiyos from Poland. So I have relationships there. So 4 weeks ago, I got a call, and he says, you know, they were excavating by the Warsaw Ghetto. There was nothing there. It was burned to the ground with the Nazis, and 2 of our survivors helped when they leveled it. They were in the labor camps that they leveled it. There was nothing left. They were digging, and they found the foundation of Mila 18. Mila 18 was the bunker where the uprising started. There was a movie made about it in a book, and he said, I could get you 7 bricks, fragments of bricks. I said, please. And he said, and he got me 3 pieces of wood. It was all burnt. He said, I found 3 pieces of burnt wood. And I got it 2 Fridays ago. And it came by DHL, and I opened it up. And it had been in the ground for 80 years. And I opened it up, and Hine ha'esh v'heitzin. I could smell it yesterday, the waft. And then I picked up the stones. And I felt like I was carrying the stones of Al-Qaeda. Imagine 460,000 Jews killed in an area a mile square. That's the equivalent of all the From Eden of the entire greater New York area. And then I remembered I had once seen the diarist of the Warsaw Ghetto. His name was Hill Zeidman. He's the niece that he writes how the diary survived. And he writes in his diary like this. He says, if by some miracle I survive this madness, I will bring a stone from the Nalef Gegas, Eretz Yisrael, and place it alongside the Kaisel Hamaravi. So when Jews come pilgrimage to that sacred site, they could weep over this stone and the loss of all the Jews, all their loved ones, and the destruction of 900 years of Polish Jewry. And I got it, and I remembered the Marsha. The Marsha in Bracha says that every Beis HaKnesses has a din of Yerushalayim. Whatever the reason is, I don't know. So I said, we're going to put it in that wall, and we'll get the prophecy, the wish of Hillel Zeidman, you know, longer here in this world. 80 years later, it could be Niskayim. Stone. And believe me, I'm going to ask my friend for one more stone, which I will bring to Yerushalayim. So, you know, on one level, it's a very sad thing. It's a memorial. You see the picture, the starving children, the starving people lying on the floor. But you know, we Jews, Eli Tzion, Isha B'Tzireh, there's always another story. We always have, there's always a birth. And I remember the Gemara in Eloi and Aloikin. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Gamliel were walking on Har Tzofim, and they saw the Makam HaMikdash. And from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they saw a fox coming out. And they all started to cry, except for Rabbi Akiva. And they said, Akiva, why aren't you crying? Makam HaMikdash. So he said, because if the Nevuah of Shualim Holchumai was Niskayim, if that prophecy of fox is running it is Niskayim, so it must be that it's going to be Niskayim, the other Nevuah, Zechariah, of Oid Yeshvu, Zkainim was Kainos, Brochayves Yerushalayim. When one prophecy happens, there's always another prophecy. So I thought of this, and I thought of that with 22 stones in the front. They say that the shuls that were here, some of them you read, they gathered the communities inside, and they burnt them down. And now we're putting the Warsaw Ghetto. We don't want to make them as a Liam here. What do we want here in the Baal Shem Tov Shul? What's the purpose of all this? And the purpose is another prophecy. The prophecy of Yecheskel. Hoysa la'ayat Hashem. Ayanicheni b'toich habika. He brought me to a great valley. V'himaleyo atzamais. V'hine yeveshais ma'id. A valley full of dry bones. V'yomer elai ben Adam. Hatichayenu ha'atzamais so'elu. Will these dry bones come back to life? V'omer Hashem Elokim atoya data. Only you know. Ben Adam, v'yomer elai ben Adam, ha'atzamai so'ele. Kol beis Yisrael hema. Hine yomrim, yov shu'atzmai seinu. We're dried out. We've lost our vigor. We've lost our life. Of the sikvay seinu. There is no more hope for us. Nigzarnu lanu. We're cast away, set aside. V'tava b'hem ruach v'chyu. A ruach from Hashem will come. Vayamdu al ragleim, and they stood on their legs. Chayil, gadol, ma'od ma'od. These bricks, for 80 years, they were buried at some hayavations. They now are in the walls of the shul, with children laughing, with young children davening. These Atzamais Hayaveshais have come back to life. That is their story. And that's on a national level. But I think on a personal level, many of us have times in our life when we have challenges, when we feel, Yov Shu'atzmai Seinu, Avdu Sikvai Seinu, we've gotten just too tired, and too old, and too worn out, and too defeated. So if that happens to you, it happens to me quite often, come to our stones, come to the shuls, the 22 shuls, the names are on the board, come to the wall with Atzamais Hayaveshais from the Warsaw Ghetto, and say, if you came back to life, I can too. I'm going to basically Yitzhak Jacobson.
Go on.
Baal Shem Tov Shul in Medzhybizh, there's no clock. Okay, there's also so you don't design. Okay. Thank you, Reb David. Birishus. The Udin Mutzalim Me'esh, the plucked brands saved from the fires of the Warsaw Ghetto and the Holocaust. It's an honor and a schus to be in your presence. Thank you for gracing us here today. And thank you, Reb David, for the honor, and thank you everybody who's gracing us here physically and virtually. The Anoshim and the Noshim Tzidkanias and the Taf. A few years ago, I was asked to introduce the then President of the United States, and initially the White House told me I could speak for 10 minutes. But at some point, the President didn't have patience, so they told me you have 9 seconds. Because he doesn't listen for more than 9 seconds, which is of course true. Even 9 seconds is a chiddush. But at this point, the mic was in my hand. I said, I'm not speaking for 9 seconds. I'll do it 4 minutes. 4 minutes, I make heaven for 4 minutes. His son-in-law was impressed that he listened for 4 minutes, actually, told me. But I was thinking, what should I say in order to ignite a spark to explain how important it is to support Israel and to support the Jewish people? And I remembered something I heard from Rabbi Lau, Hagan Reb Yisrael Meir Lau Shlita, the former chief rabbi of Israel. He once shared this. We have here from the 22 shuls, you probably saw some in Krakow. Krakow is very close to Auschwitz. And he said when the SS liquidated the Krakow ghetto, and Schindler's List, of course, was created from Jews in Krakow, there was a 6-year-old boy. His name was Leibele Goldstein. And Leibele Goldstein, 6-year-olds in 1942, in 1943, in 1941 had the instincts of 70-year-olds. They have been through so much. They had the instinct for survival. Leibele lost both of his parents, but he knew that he has to run. Where do you run? So Rabbi Lau said he found a garbage can. And he went into the garbage can, and he covered himself with the lid, and he went under the heap of garbage in order to hide. The SS, which for them, murdering the last Jewish child was so valuable, it was so important, historic a task, that resources that were necessary to save their nation were taken and used just to be able to hunt down that last Jewish child. So the SS made sure to open every garbage can. And he said one SS commander came to this garbage can and opened the lid, and there was Leibele Goldstein, a 6-year-old Polish Yiddish kid, a Krakow Jewish boy. Rabbi Lau said Leibele Goldstein wanted to save his life. So he took out from his pocket the one prized, priceless commodity item that he had and offered it to the SS commander. It was a lollipop. He picked up the lollipop and he handed it to the SS commander with a smile and said, this is for you. Rabbi Lau said to reciprocate that gesture, he took a gun and he shot a bullet into Leibele Goldstein's brain, falling dead in the heap of garbage where he offered him the lollipop. And I told the president, repeat this story 1.5 million times. Repeat this story 1.5 million times. And then 6 million times. To appreciate what our people went through just 2 mortgages ago. But as you know, we have 3 names for cemeteries in Hebrew. In English, we have 1 name, it's called cemetery. Did you ever notice that in our language, in Lashon HaKodesh, there's 3 names, right? Beis HaKvaris, a home of burial. Beis Olam, or Beis Almin, a home of eternity. Beis HaChayim, a home of life. Why 3 divergent names for a place we all unfortunately know what it is? And I think perhaps one answer is that these 3 names capture 3 different perspectives of how one can view a cemetery. I could go to a cemetery and I can justifiably say it's a Beis HaKvaris. It's the end. It's a home of burial. It's true. I can also go to a cemetery and I could say it's a Beis Olam. It's a home of eternity. One of the foundational axioms of Judaism is, as the Jewish philosophers call it, Hisharus HaNefesh, the eternity of a soul. It's a Beis Olam. A soul lives forever. A soul doesn't die. But I can also go to a Jewish cemetery and I could look at it and I could say it's going to be a Beis HaChaim. Why? Because the values and the faith and the passion and the love and the ideals of those people who are there have not only been bequeathed in books, but they continue to live in the hearts, in the souls, and in the daily lives of their children, grandchildren, of their students, disciples, friends. And when we look at Poland today, the largest cemetery in Jewish history, every centimeter is durchgezapt mit jüdischer Blut. You know what durchgezapt means? You darf say Medzhybizh ein Amerikaner. Every centimeter is soaked, saturated with Jewish blood. And when you look at these stones, you can only imagine the history of Leibele Goldstein and another 1.5 million gassed, 2 million children gassed. And yet the great miracle of Jewish history is that we don't only look at these stones as a Beis HaKvaris and a Beis Olam, but we take these stones and transform them into a Beis HaChayim, a home in which the Jewish people and Judaism and Yiddishkeit and Torah and Tefillah and Gemilas Chasadim lives and pulsates with vibrancy and with depth and with meaning and with joy and with creativity. I want to mention another detail of that Marsha Reb David referred to. In Maseches Megillah, Chav Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Amar Reb Elazar Tanya, Reb Elazar Kapar Omer, Asidim Batei Knesiyos or Batei Medrashos Shebebavel, Sheyikavu Beretz Yisrael. All shuls in the diaspora, beginning from Babylonia, will be re-established in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Marsha, over there, and the Marsha was a Rav in Poland for most of his life, including 9 years in Chelim. The Marsha writes, don't just think Chelim is a place of jokes. The Marsha wrote his commentary, 9 years in Chelim. So the Marsha writes now, I was once in Toronto doing a Shabbaton, so I decided to tell Chelim stories. I don't know, I was in the mood of Chelim. So a 90-year-old woman gets up and says, Rabbi, why? I'm from Chelim, please, respect. I'm like, okay, I didn't expect that. So the Marsha says, it says in Tehillim, many say it on Shabbos, Shir Amalois LeDavid Samachti Ba'oimrim Li Beis Hashem Nelech Oimdois Hoyu Ragleinu B'Yerushalayim 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 Abnuya Kirshel Chubru L'Yachdo Shesham Olu Shvatim, etc. It says the Marsha. This kapitel, this mizmor was said about the times of exile. David says, Samachti, I will rejoice, Ba'oimrim Li, when a Jew tells me, Beis Hashem Nelech, let's go to Shul. Let's go to the house of God, let's go to Shul. Let's go to the Baal Shem Tov Shul, either in Ukraine or in Rockland County. But let's go Beis Hashem Nelech. Why am I so happy? So they're going to Shul. Why am I so happy? I'll tell you why. Because Because when I see people in Shul, I don't just see them in a physical Shul in the diaspora. I see them actually that their feet, their legs are standing in the gates of Yerushalayim. Why? Rockland County is nice, but it's not Jerusalem. I'll tell you why. Because Yerushalayim HaBenuya, Marsha says, I imagine the rebuilt Yerushalayim. And then it's Ir Shechubra Lo Yachtov. It's the city that all the shuls from the whole world become connected and an extension of the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. He says every shul will have a geder and become part of the Beis HaMikdash. Which, by the way, is good news. Because if you're afraid of Mashiach's coming, then you're going to lose your seat in Shul. You know, some people go crazy when somebody, I don't know what the meaning in this Shul, but some people, the worst tragedy is when you take their seat in Shul. I'm sure you once took somebody's seat and you've experienced the wrath. So the good news is you won't have to give up your seat according to the Maharsha. It's going to go to Yerushalayim, it's going to be connected to the Beis HaMikdash. I'm sure for an extra Nadavi you'll get a beautiful view, and everything will be wonderful. That's Yerushalayim. So the stones of a shul, according to the Maharsha, actually have a definition of Yerushalayim and the future definition of an extension of the Beis HaMikdash. Reb David sent me last week the diary of Dr. Zeidman. And he says, here's a diary of Dr. Zeidman about the stones of the Warsaw Ghetto. I say, Dr. Zeidman, I knew Dr. Zeidman very well. He was a Medzhybizh by us. Hillel Zeidman was born in Galicia, in Buchach. Depends where you come from. He was born in Galicia, I think in 1912, if I'm not mistaken, Tofresh Ayin Beis. He passed away in 95, Beis Elul or Gimel Elul. I knew him because he was you remember Dr. Zeidman, anybody? Any Yiddish readers here? He was a seasoned Yiddish journalist and writer. So I knew him very, very well, Dr. Zeidman. I used to read him every week. He had a column on the Parsha. He was in the ghetto. He was the secretary of Agudas Yisrael in Warsaw in the 1930s. And he wrote a book about the people, Ishim She'ikarti, the people I knew. And he held a diary from the ghetto. And in January 43, he wrote those words that Reb David quoted. I would love to take a few stones and bring them to the Kaisel Ma'aravi. He was smuggled out and he went to France. He was liberated in 44. He survived the war and he moved here. He moved to the United States of America. But I want to share with you, since these are Dr. Zeidman's words about the stones of the Warsaw Ghetto, what Dr. Zeidman once shared. And it's very apropos for us. Dr. Zeidman said, the first instance of somebody standing up to anti-Semitism, to Jew hatred, we all know is in Parshas Shmos. Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayigdal Moshe, Vayetze Alechav, he goes out to his brothers, and what does he see? He sees an Egyptian beating a Jew to death. Those who were in the Warsaw Ghetto, those heroes with us who were in the Warsaw Ghetto or in the camps, the sight of somebody beating a Jew to death was so normal, tragically and sadly, that it was, as Auschwitz survivor once told me, he says, in Auschwitz, if you were a rat or a mouse or an ant, you had a much better chance of getting dignity than if you were a Jew, and a bigger chance of survival. For them to kill a Jew was less significant than for you stepping on an ant, less significant psychologically and emotionally. Moshe sees this scene, and what happens? Vayifen koi v'choi, vayarki einish, vayaches hamitzri vayitmeneu b'choi. He strikes the Egyptian, he kills him, and he hides him in the sand. If you look in the Medrash Rabbah, over there on the Pasuk, the Medrash Rabbah asks quite a question. When I served the first time, I was quite astounded. It's a classic Jewish question. Vayach, he struck the Egyptian and killed him. How? And of course, there's an argument. And I'm thinking, Ribono Shalom, this happened 3,400 years ago. Do we really have to argue about everything? Big argument, how he killed him. 3 opinions. First opinion is, he kohu be'egroifoi, with his fist. His fist. Moshe took martial arts in the palace. Para gave him an education, creme de la creme, just like in Muncie. He took his fist and he killed him. Second opinion is, magreifa shaltit, Rebbe Vyasa. The Jew was shoveling, he was building. So he had a shovel filled with plaster, with cement. Moshe took the shovel and he killed the Egyptian. Rabbanan Amri, Shema Mefarish. He killed him with Hashem's name. That's the answer everybody knows. Why? Because Rashi quotes it. Rashi chooses the third one. He ignores the first two. Rashi says it later. The question is, the Gemara asks in Yuma Daf Hey in a few places, why do you have to argue about something that happened a few thousand years ago? How Moshe killed him? Well, just to argue. Say, well, how did they know? They had a tradition. There was a video. Somebody chapped a video. There were Moisrim there. But what's the name? And Lamainaf Gemini even. Like, he killed him. Baruch Hashem. Next. Jew was saved. Weitergegangen. So here's from Dr. Zeidman, Zechronu Livracha. At least the way I understood it. He said the argument is how to deal with anti-Semitism. It's a profound argument. In the last century, it splintered the Jewish world. How do you know something is a good argument? We're still arguing about it. We're still arguing. 4,000 years later, we're still arguing. What do you do with the Egyptian who wants to beat a Jew? What do you do? What do you do when you see it? What do you do when you read about it? This weekend, Eretz Yisrael is dealing with dozens and dozens and dozens of rockets falling in Jewish communities from Yerushalayim to Sderot, from the Islamic Jihad, Yimach Shemam V'Zichron. What do you do? What's the role of Knesset Yisrael? It's a question. Moshe saw him and he understood you have to defend the Jew. How? Vayachas HaMitzri, says the Medrash, how? And Dr. Zeidman, in a very ingenious interpretation, the survivor of the ghetto, said they got into an argument. The first opinion is, Be'egroifai, Jews need to learn how to use their fist. Nobody likes to use their fist. There was a Jewish professor in Harvard. She once said, when a Jew makes a fist, the next step is, other nationalities without names, if they pick up a fist, go to the doctor, check out your nose or your ribs. But Jews make a fist and then they're confessing for 9 centuries. Sometimes you have to learn how to use your fist. Or to quote the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Habala Hargach, Hashkeim Lahargai. That's one view. 150 years ago, this was a view. Jews have to start defending themselves in a very serious and aggressive way physically. Dr. Zeidman says there was another opinion. This was much of the American Jewish community 1 century ago. They said, no, we don't use fists, we use shovels. What shovels? Shovels represents construction. Go into real estate. Build structures. Build skyscrapers. Make money. Create diplomatic, political alliances. Get your voices heard. Get senators on the phone, congressmen on the phone. Create personal relationships with leaders. Build the infrastructure of Jewish social life. Make Jews powerful, influential, with affluence, with good connections. That's how you fight anti-Semitism. We don't use fists. And there was a huge machlokas about this. Then Dr. Zeidman said, came the religious segment, and said, what fist? What shovels? Shema Meferish. Open up a Tilim. Eilev Arechim, Eilev Asusim, Anachnu B'Shem Hashem Alekeinu Naskin. Egypt didn't have fists. Rome didn't have shovels. Greece didn't have gymnasiums, coliseums, gladiators, theaters. What did we have? Shema Meferish. V'atem adveikim b'Shem Alekeichem chayim kolchem hayoyim. The Rebbeinu Shalom, Torah, Mitzvahs, Yiddishkeit, Avodas Hashem. A huge machlekes. How do you kill the Egyptian? May I add to Dr. Zeidman's words and say, we live in a generation where we are called upon to make peace between the 3 opinions. And employ the words of Erev in Daf Yud Gimel b'Gematria Echad, Elu ve'elu, Divrei Elokim Chayim. The power of the Jewish people is Shema Meferish, Ein Od Milvadai. But the Rebbeinu Shalom says to the Jew, sometimes I need you to use your fist. And the Rebbeinu Shalom tells the Jew, I want you to employ your shovel. And when a Jew employs the shovel and the fist, it's not detached from the Shema Meferish, it's a continuum of the Shema Meferish. It's a word from the Heilig Yerushalayim. He said, Vayachas HaMitzri. It's a real Chassidic word. He struck the Egyptian, it's like the Baal Shem Tov Shul. Vayachas HaMitzri, he struck the Egyptian with the Shema Meferish, Vayitmeneu b'choil. Choil, not sand. Choil from the word mundane. Vayitmeneu, he concealed the Shema Meferish, b'choil, in mundane words. You didn't hear from Moshe Rabbeinu saying the Shema Mefarish. Didn't look like it. Moshe didn't close his eyes and put on a gartel and run to the mikveh and say L'Shem Yichud. You know why? By that time the Jew would have been dead. You can call the Chevra Kadisha. It looked like it was Chayil. But what was the pnimius of it? It was Shema Mefarish. When I saw the word of the Rishon, I understood, that's the pshat in the Medrash. When a Jew uses a fist, according to Shulchan Aruch, it's also Shema Mefarish. And when a Jew uses a shovel, according to Shulchan Aruch, it's also Shema Mefarish. We don't believe in the polarity, in the dichotomy, in the absolute gulf between heaven and earth, as the Baal Shem Tov said. And he may have said it from a place that looked very, very similar to this place, pun intended. The Baal Shem Tov said these words. We say each day, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Asher Yitzesi Eschem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Liyois Lachem, Leiloikim. So we take this pasuk for granted. I am God, I took you out of Egypt to be your God, to be for you a God. He said it means much deeper. Liyois Lachem Leiloikim, I took you out of Mitzrayim, Liyois Lachem Leiloikim, so you should be able to live a life where you recognize that your Lachem is also Leiloikim. There's no absolute separation of Chetzio El Hashem. What is to Caesar goes to Caesar. When you're in Rome, you're in Rome. Liyos Lachem Eich Leiloikim. Or as I once heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Mesechte Chulin is where? In Kotchin. So paraphrasing a good brisk language, linguistics, he said, by a Yid is Chulin, Oich Adin in Kotchin. By a Jew, Chulin, Lachem, is also a din. It's also part and parcel of Kotchin. There's no separation. Our generation is the one that needs to make peace. Synthesize between the fist, the shovel, and the Shema Mefarish, which in the truth of Yiddishkeit are completely one and synthesized. When I think about today's Maimed, and I go back to Dr. Zeidman's diary, and this essay of his, that's why it meant so much for him to have these stones from Warsaw in a shul that will be attached to the Beis HaMikdash, near the Kaisel HaMa'aravi in Yerushalayim, because ultimately all of Jewish history is connected, all of Jewish history is one, and every Beis HaKvaris and Beis Olam becomes, in our souls, a Beis HaChayim. I'm sure when these Heilige Yidden are here with us today, we heard their words before. And one can only imagine the pain and the grief and the trauma of people who lost almost everything and everybody. And you know, there's no way to wrap your brain around Jewish history. I got an email today from somebody. He writes to me, I'm an atheist. I'm like, okay, that's wonderful. What else? What else do you want to share with me? And therefore I don't fast on Tisha B'Av. That's wonderful. But he says, I don't fast on Tisha B'Av, but I don't laugh either, because I know how much our people went through. And I thought, you know, Reb Levi Yitzchak Baditsha would make matamen from this. He said, I don't fast, but I don't laugh either. I can't laugh. The Baal Shem Tov said, Kol Yisrael Arevim. What's Arevim? Not only guarantors. Arevim means we're mixed up together. We're integrated. Arevim means sweet. We're sweet to each other. A Jew experiences the sweetness of another Jew. Somebody said to me, what's this thing you're speaking about? With stones are being put into a shul. It's nice with stones. Now we're into stones suddenly. You know, Jews always have opinions, right? You know that. Huh? You run a radio show with opinions. Jews have opinions. Okay, listen. I don't mind different opinions. But I said, you know, the first Jew, Yaakov Avinu, he was on his way to build a Jewish family. And somehow the Torah chooses one moment in the scene. Vayikach me'avnei hamokoim. He took from the stones, and he slept there. And of course the Medrash right away tells us there was a fight. There was a machloikas. 12 stones, every stone said, I want the head. Ma'asa Kadosh Baruch Hu, he turned the stones into one. He wakes up, it was one stone. I once heard from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, when Yaakov woke up, he said, Ein Zakiyim Beis Elokim. This is a house of God, it's a shul. How did he know? He said, a place that even the stones get into a fight. If the stones are arguing, Ein Zakiyim Beis Elokim. There has to be a board here, a board of directors. In the shul, 12 people on the board fighting about the stones. Sfasema says, what's the story with stones fighting? I mean, what's the point? And he says Yaakov was about to go build the Jewish people. He's going to have 12 sons represented by the 12 stones, and they're going to fight. And everyone says, I have the head! I have the head! You can have the legs, you can even have the stomach, you can have the kidneys, the pancreas. I don't care if you have the heart, but the head is mine. Ich bin der Rosh B'nai Yisrael. So the Rebbeinu Shalom tells Yaakov, listen, it's not going to work this way. If you want to build the Jewish people, the 12 stones are going to have to become one. As we have here 22 stones, more than 12 stones, from different shuls. Today we have to remember, Vayikach me'avnei hamokoim. But it's one. We can't afford anymore to live in a world where Jews can't truly love and be here for each other, even if the stones are sometimes different. And one person may emphasize a fist or a shovel or a Shema Mefurish, but it must become one. And then the stones can join Yerushalayim, Ir Shechubra Lo Yachdav. It's the final moments of Tisha B'Av. There's a medrash that comes to mind. It's one of those medrash pliyas. The medrash says, we say it every day, Boine Yerushalayim Hashem, Nidche Yisrael Yechanes. Hashem builds Jerusalem, He will gather the scattered of Israel. Says the Medrash, very strange. Afal Pisha Boine Yerushalayim Hashem, Mikol Makom Nidche Yisrael Yechanes. Even though Hashem builds Yerushalayim, He's still going to gather the Jewish people. Where did the Medrash get a question and an answer? It's one of those Medrashim, you call it a pliya. Very strange what Chazal were saying. Why should Hashem not gather the Jewish people if He builds Yerushalayim? It's a medrash, fine. Chazal felt this way, but what did they mean? It's one of those medrashim very hard to understand. So I want to share with you a vart on this, an insight. Heard this insight from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He made a siyum on Masechta Bava Metzia. So first he made a siyum al pi halach, al pi niglish, the Guinness, the Rambam, other shittas. Then he said there's a Mishnah Bava Metzia. Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. You remember the Mishnah? Habayis v'aliyah shenaflu. You have an apartment with a condominium, 2 floors. Yankel lives downstairs. Shmedel lives upstairs. They're wonderful neighbors. Of course, like every Jewish neighbor, they get into issues, but they're good. One day there's a tsunami, a hurricane, a storm, a fire, chas v'shalom, and the home gets destroyed, both floors. What do you do? Habayis v'aliyah shenaflu. What do you do? So the Mishnah says, Oymer loy ba'al aliyah l'ba'al habayis. The guy on the second floor tells the guy on the first floor, you rebuild the first floor, build the floor, build the pillars, build the foundation, build your roof, and then I'll rebuild the second floor. Makes sense. Yankel is on the first floor, he tells Shmedel, I want to move to St. Moritz. I want to move to Palm Beach. I want to move to Ramat Beit Shemesh. I'm not interested anymore in this house. He says, but I can't move into the second floor. He says, it's your problem, I don't have to rebuild my house. What do? Says the Mishnah, and it's a Psak Halacha, Choshen Mishpat, I think of Samach Dalet, says the Mishnah, the guy from the second floor can rebuild the first floor and live there. Ooh! Yankel comes back from Switzerland. He comes back and he likes the first floor. He says, give me back my house. Says, excusez-moi, you didn't want to build it. It's my house. So the Mishnah says, no problem. Pay him back his expenses, what he invested in building the first floor. Pay him and move into the first floor. And now Shmedel can take the money, he can rebuild the second floor, he can move to St. Moritz or Beit Shemesh Lav. Ad kan the Mishnah. Every Mishnah has a pshat. And pshat, in the world of business, it also has a metaphysical meaning. The Rameh Mifano writes. So the Rebbe said as follows. What's the bias and the aliyah in the world? The Gemara says in Tainus, it says Yerushalayim is ir, shechubra lo yachdav. There's two layers of Yerushalayim. There's Yerushalayim shel mata and Yerushalayim shel mayla. When Yaakov woke up, he said, V'zeh shar hashamayim. There's the Beis Hamikdash down here, and there's the Beis Hamikdash up there, and they're parallel to each other. The bias is Jerusalem below. That's where Jews live. The Aliyah is Jerusalem above. Reb Simcha Elberg, who also lived in Warsaw, wrote a sefer called Varsha Shel Mila. There's Varsha Shel Mata and Varsha Shel Mila. Bias v'Aliyah. The Shchenim got along. Of course, we got into fights with Hashem here and there, but more or less it was fun. We lent eggs to each other. We lent milk. It was good. One day comes the Churban, and the bias gets destroyed, and the Aliyah also gets destroyed. Why? Because the Gemara says in Tainus Daf Hey, Hashem said, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and even if you don't know it from the Gemara, you should know it from Avrem Elifried's song. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you remember? I'm not going to walk into Yerushalayim Shel Mila until the Jews don't go to Yerushalayim Shel Mata. In Zohar Parshas Nasi it says Hashem made an oath. So if the bias is destroyed, the Aliyah is also destroyed. Hashem says, I can't move into the Aliyah as long as the Jews are not in Yerushalayim. So the Rebbeinu Shalom comes to the Balabayas and says, do me a favor, build up Yerushalayim Shel Mata. Tosfos says in Tainus Daf Yud, Yerushalayim is Yira Shalem, complete Yira. The Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Zayin, Ifticha Torah Shesoif Yisrael B'Soif Galusim Lasos Tshuva Miyad Ein Egolim. Build up Yerushalayim, do Tshuva. Shuva Elai v'Shuva Aleichem. So I could move into the Aliyah. I want to move into the Aliyah, but I need you to rebuild Yerushalayim below. The Rebbe got very emotional, and he said, Golus is so long, the Jewish people turn to the Baal Aliyah and say, Ich bin nicht interessiert. I'm not interested. I found other houses. There's other isms that are more attractive. I'm going to build other homes. I'm abandoning the bias. I'm not interested. Too many disappointments, too much pain, too much trauma. I'm going to find other glicken, other oysters, other homes. But the Eberstein said, bengt sich. He misses. He yearns. So what does he do? He says, you know what? I'm going to build the bias. I'm going to rebuild Yerushalayim Shel Mata. The Jews see Yerushalayim. Psst, nice. They say, oh, I like this. I'm coming back. So the Mishnah would say, what's the halacha? The Rebbeinu Shalom says, no problem. Pay up all the expenses. That's the Mishnah. All the expenses, you have to pay up Hashem, His expenses. That's not easy. So the Rebbe said, Ved bitter. This is bitter. Comes the Medrash and says, Afal pisha b'nei Yerushalayim Hashem, mikol makom nitchi Yisrael yechanas. The Mishnah in Baba Metzia is talking about two neighbors who are strangers, Yankel and Shmedel. But Hashem is our father and mother. So even though I rebuilt Yerushalayim, b'nei Yerushalayim mikol makom, I'm not waiting till you pay up expenses. I want you in my home. Come to Yerushalayim. And you don't have to pay up all the expenses. I yearn, I want to be with you. Unlike the Mishnah. And that's why Boine is Lashon Hoiva and Yechanis is Lashon Asid. Grammatically doesn't make sense. One is in the present, the second is in the future. Hashem says, I built it, but I want you to come. This was his seal. This is a PS, postscript, Adkan. I'm just adding this on my own. This he said, Yutes Kislev, Tavshin Chavav, 1966. 17 months later, what happened 17 months later? The Rebbeinu Shalom gave Klal Yisrael Yerushalayim. And remember, it's not something Israel wanted. Levi Eshkol, Moshe Dayan, Yitzchak Rabin fought till the last moment. Begin, Narkis, Motke Gur, the pressure was crazy. They tried to get Jordan out of the war. King Hussein didn't stop. Begin called a 3 a.m. Knesset meeting. They call it the pajama meeting because everybody was in pajamas. To get Levi Eshkol to call in the cabinet and to agree. 10 o'clock in the morning, Chavzayin Nir. May 7th, 1967. Motke Gur announced Harabayit Biyadenu. And a shiver went through Knesset Yisrael. Nobody expected this gift. So 17 months later, Boine Yerushalayim Hashem. So you would think, I don't want you. Nidche Yisrael Yechanes. We're not dealing with two neighbors. We're dealing with Laman Achai V'Reyai Bonim Atam Hashem Elokeichem Ahavti Eschem Amar Hashem. As we put in today the stones from our brothers and sisters in Poland, 3 million Jews who lived in Poland before the war. Today, 3,500 Jews left in Poland after the war. As we put in the stones into a Beis Hashem, Samachti b'yoymrim li, Beis Hashem nelech. You know why? Oim dois hoyu ragleinu b'yisharayich Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim habnuya ki'ir shechubra layachdov. A Yerushalayim that physically was given to the Jewish people, at least to some degree. Nidche Yisrael Yechanes. May these stones and all the stones and all the Batei Knesiyos become speedily attached to the Beis Hamikdash b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen. Amen.